and welcome to episode 8 of Money Mountaineering with Peter Neuwirth, which features critical thinking experts Leland Faust and Richard Conn Jr., founders of Agents for Critical Thinking. I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, proud producer of the show on the Incandescent Radio Network and Incandescent TV. Pete and I know you are going to love this episode. But before he starts his Q&A with these gentlemen, let me tell you a little bit about our guests. Leland Faust founded CSI Capital Management. He was Chief Investment Officer from 1978 through 2011 and managed more than $1.5 billion for the company. Going backward, in 1971, he graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School with a JD degree. While at Harvard, he instructed a class at the United States Income Taxation as part of the internal tax program. His book, one of his amazing projects, is called A Capitalist Lament: How Wall Street is Fleecing You and Running America. Please tell us more. And Richard Conn Jr. has practiced international corporate law for nearly 20 years as an equity partner with the international law firm Latham & Watkins. He founded that firm's Moscow office in 1992 and served as a key advisor to the presidential administration of Russian President Boris Yeltsin and president of the Moscow-based Foreign Bar Association. He founded Eurasia Advisors in 2003, a long-standing past member of the board of directors of the U.S.-Russia Business Council and of the International Crisis Group's International Board of Advisors. Richard regularly consults with the World Bank, members of Congress, and the administration regarding CIS-related issues. He co-chaired the U.S.-Russia Business Council and American Chamber of Commerce in Moscow, a joint initiative to facilitate Russian access to the WTO. Richard is also a masterful chess player, and in 2010 ran for the deputy presidency of the World Chess Federation on an international ticket. His current book is The Earthbound Parent: How and Why to Raise Your Little Angels Without Religion. Oh my gosh, so much good stuff here. Take it away, Pete.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. And, we do have something different today. We've got not just one guest, we got two guests, and we don't have an actuary or any kind of math or type of person. We got two lawyers, and that is quite a treat. And two great lawyers. And Leland, I've known you for a while, and Richard, I guess I've known you about 20 minutes now. Really, really looking forward to hearing what both of you have to say, because you've both written interesting books that have slightly different angles on critical thinking and what it means. And maybe we'll just start with you, Leland, because I'm much more familiar with your book, which is a great book about all the ways that Wall Street and other investment type firms fool people into perhaps not thinking critically. So you want to tell me a little bit about the book and how it led you to where you are today?
Well, sure. I think that my book does illustrate so many ways in which critical thinking is lacking. But when I started the book and when I actually finished it, I wasn't thinking of it as so much as an expose on critical thinking, which is not billed as, but as an expose on Wall Street, where I had spent essentially my entire career and was so unhappy with what I observed. I came into the industry thinking that the good guys would win and things like that I'd grown up with, that people don't get away with telling lies constantly. And I was surprised at first, and then later learned to expect it, that wasn't how it worked. So, but I also, as the title tells you, I'm a capitalist. I believe in free enterprises, free markets. I think that's key to both wealth and freedom. So I'm saying that the system is so good, but that it's been hijacked by the Wall Street firms. And then when I look back on it in more recent years, as I've been more involved in focusing on critical thinking or lack thereof, a lot of the critical thinking problems show up in Wall Street.
Richard, you wrote a book about raising kids and I guess raising them to to think critically or to learn how to think. And boy, most kids believe in magic, and maybe that's okay and maybe not. But tell us a little bit about your book and how you would think kids should learn better to think.
Sure, Pete. The Earthbound Parent is designed to promote critical thinking, higher ethical standards, and more peaceful relations among people. So the basic theme of the book is that passing along ancient mythologies, beliefs in deities and such is not necessary in order to inculcate, for example, ethics into our society and into our children. So while the philosophy and concepts in the book are certainly of value far beyond mere parenting, the book focuses on parenting because that tends to be when we as adults give a lot of thought to the question of, well, how are we going to raise children? Do we want them to embrace ancient traditions because our parents and grandparents did that? Or do we want to go in a slightly different direction, which is a bit more humble in the sense of looking at ourselves as, essentially just another life form on the planet. We all ought to get along, and we don't necessarily want to have the arrogance of supernatural constructs as our foundation for our belief systems. So the book does not, incidentally, discourage parents from allowing their children to have imaginary, lives and fantasy, etc. But it does encourage parents to help the children recognize the difference between that and reality. And so, for example, in the context of critical thinking, one major theme of the book is, for example, if your child is having trouble falling asleep at night, as my 5-year-old did at one point, and says to you, "Dad, I can't sleep because I'm afraid of dying. I'm worried about what happens when I die." Well, that's a moment when a parent, of course, wants to make the child feel better. And there's a bifurcation there, a fork in the road. You can, of course, make that child feel great by just saying, "Don't worry, sweetie, you're sleeping under the magic blanket. Everything will be okay." There'd be no great harm in that. Or you can talk about there's, being some old man up in the sky watching you. But if you wish, you can go in a different direction and say what I said, which is 12 words, which take care of the desire, if you will, to make a child feel more secure and safe without injecting a fantasy that many parents try to perpetuate for a lifetime. This concept of a magical place where you're protected in the universe.
Right.
Those 12 words have worked for virtually everybody I've ever spoken them to. So let's see if it works for you, Pete, and you, Leland. It will be just the way it was before you were born. My 5-year-old heard that. She thought about it for a few moments. She went to sleep. She's now 13 and has not raised it again.
Well, what I love about that is what you said to your child, which is to help them feel safe. Because I think, being afraid and being, not feeling anxious is one of the things that keeps people from thinking critically. And I also remember, at least in the little bit I listened to of your book, that you also think TV is not such a great thing, and that kind of gets in the way of kids' ability to learn to think. And I guess I would kind of throw it out to both of you guys: is what are the sorts of things in today's world that get in the way of people's ability to think critically?
Leland, do you want to go first?
Okay. Well, I think certainly if you bring up the question of television and media, you can certainly have the problem that in our society that celebrity and entertainment seems to, trump almost anything. And the pun is almost intended in a sense that that's how we got our president, a few years ago, that he was a television star, and people then started voting for him because they thought they knew him, and the celebrity culture. And I think that has a real, effect on things. And it certainly has had an effect in Wall Street, with the celebrity culture there, that people don't understand what's not really knowable. And, it's only after the fact that you can determine who a great investor is. You can't figure it out while it's going on. And no one will accept that fact. Everybody thinks that they can identify the great investor, or that if he's done something right once, he's necessarily gonna do it again. And I mean, a wonderful example of this was put in a book by Nassim Taleb, and he was suggesting that luck plays so much importance in this, and he gave a wonderful example. When I read it, I slammed my hand on the table and said, "Damn, why didn't I think of that?" But the real example, which I loved, was his suggestion for a coin flipping contest in Yankee Stadium. He said, "Okay, everybody stand up." So 50,000 people are standing up. He said, "Now we're going to flip a coin. If you think it's going to be a head, raise your hand. If you don't, keep it down." They flip the coin, they announce it. So about 25,000 people sit down, and they do it again. 12,000 people sit down. Well, for 50,000 people, you need about 14 calls in a row to actually get one winner statistically. Now, is your suggestion this is a really smart predictor of coin flips?
So, no, but I tell you, if you ask that guy, what's your secret? I'm sure he'd have a real good explanation of how he got those 14 heads in a row.
Right, exactly. Or called it right 14 times. Yeah.
Right.
So, but there's so much of that on Wall Street. So if you listen to a Jim Cramer, and you say, "Gee, this guy pretends he knows everything," well, just think about how difficult it would be, if not impossible, to know about 30 different stocks for a month. That'd be 900 stocks, right? I mean, you can't possibly know that. And so, we get into that, or we get into somebody who was, Morningstar's mutual fund manager of the decade, a couple decades ago. And then for the next 6 years, he kept managing his fund. And for the last 5 years of his career, he had a really good year, a really good month, the last month of that career, so that his fund for the last 5 years, this is the manager of the decade, rallied from being 859th to being 858th in its category. So right. It tells us that he had some kind of a idea that worked for a while and then didn't, or that he was lucky for a while and that he didn't. But he was promoted, and I talk about this in my book as one of the 3 huge problems on Wall Street, which is this unrelenting hucksterism and pretending of what's going on, rather than looking at the logic behind it and seeing what makes sense.
So, but back to you, Richard. When you're raising kids, I mean, I think you're actually also talking a little bit about independent thinking, which I guess is related to critical thinking. And when you're raising kids, they listen to their parents, and they do what their parents do. So and they're looking for that. And so, Richard, how do you teach a kid to think independently as well as critically?
So, and this may scare people, but I don't really do TV. So it doesn't cross my mind to spend the evening sitting around watching television with the kids. That would never be the center, point of our lives. So in part, critical thinking comes from sharing these parenting experiences with your child. believe me, if you put your child on your knee at age 2, 3, 4 and start teaching them games, they'll love it. And if you start teaching them how to play piano or other instruments, they will love it. Mine went through phases of learning the harp and the violin and all sorts of fun instruments. There's so much to do in life without getting into this passive world of watching, turning things on or manipulating devices. We only now, Pete, in the last year or so, have given limited access to our teenage daughters to phones, and I'm sure some out there would say, well, that's cruel. Well, no, we want them to be social. We really do. But we want them to interact on a human level at school with kids. And we want their time to be very limited in terms of being able to be on all these apps. So I think it comes from the role model that we set as parents and how we interact with the world. The children will follow that. They'll view that as normal. But, if instead you're a parent that just turns on the TV when you come home and pops a beer, well, you have to expect that's what your children are going to see and emulate. And that's your choice. You get to raise them as you wish.
You mentioned games, so I of course I have to ask you this.
Sure.
You're not only a chess player, you're an extraordinary chess player, and some extraordinary chess players. Did you find that teaching your kids chess helped them in their critical thinking, and what role is that game? What role does game play in strategic thinking play? Because strategic thinking is another kind of thinking.
I would say that the obvious stuff is maybe not the part that I think is the most valuable. It is certainly useful for a child to learn how to calculate, how to think in terms of, controlling their mind to look 1 or 2 moves or maybe 3 moves into the future. And that level of concentration is hard. It's hard for adults. It's great to develop some memory, to develop some competitive spirit, the camaraderie of playing against other children in chess. But there are things that are less obvious that to me are really valuable in game playing, particularly chess. I'll use that as the example. There's nothing like losing in chess to teach all of us modesty and humility. We as humans tend to have this construct, and it's tied in part with this religious background, that somehow we're really smart, really special, all this stuff. When you play chess, you realize how stupid you are. There's no other way to put it. And that's a great gift. It really is. You just realize, gosh, if I make a good move every once in a while, it's because I've really had to concentrate, put other things out of my mind, train my mind. And it's just a lot of fun to see all of our own weaknesses. And with AI now having become super strong and seeing that applied to chess, it's even more humbling. We chess players can see that we're basically slugs compared to the computational ability of computers. So with children, it also though gives them a sense of responsibility and accountability because they make good moves, bad moves, they win, they lose. It gives them a sense of being able to have some control over their own worlds as well. So there are all sorts of elements to this, and chess is now sweeping the planet, and I'm delighted to see that because the more we have practice in taking joy in thinking, I think the better off we are. The more camaraderie we develop by having chess as sort of a common language, the better. And the more we recognize our own inabilities, and our own weaknesses, I think that also is very positive because we've got a lot of problems to solve together, and we need to realize they're not going to be solved by magic wands or magical thinking. It's going to be critical thinking as best we can do it.
Right. Well, just shifting slightly, I had, on a previous podcast, I had Annie Duke, who is a poker player. Right. And where we were talking is about making decisions where the future is uncertain. And this comes out when you're trying to figure out when to retire. Do you have enough money to retire? How much money should you spend to retire? All kinds of financial decisions that have an uncertain future. And her point was that poker was a great model, and particularly because we all have biases. So I wanted to ask both of you guys, and maybe we can go back to you, Leland. How do you overcome the biases that one has when you're making financial decisions? And both of you guys, maybe you could.
And I don't know if Annie Duke was comparing investing to poker, because that's another theme of my book, that Wall Street, mainstream Wall Street, has turned investing into gambling. And again, if back to the kind of the numeracy, which is a sort of adjunct or part of critical thinking, that you understand how things work. And gambling on Wall Street, anybody, at least I think, who thinks it through wouldn't do it, as opposed to investing on Wall Street. I'm going to give you the difference, what I think, in a second. But the idea of investing is to put your money into a venture which you think has the potential to increase in value, because what it does will become more efficient and bigger, or both, so that the company can grow and make more money, or it can become more efficient and make more money, or even best, both. And if you do that, when you invest, everybody in the transactions can be quite happy. So you invest in a company, you give the company your money, it gives you the stock. So the company's gotten what it wants, the money to work with, you've gotten the stock. If your stock does go up in value, then both sides in this transaction have profited. The company got your money, it put it to work, you were able to sell it later at a higher price because they put it to work productively. Everybody wins, as opposed to gambling. And gambling is either a zero-sum game or a negative-sum game.
But many of these decisions, for example, the decision to retire, or the decision as to how much of your portfolio to spend, you're really playing against yourself. And then you're dealing with your own internal biases, your optimism bias, your status quo bias. And I don't know, Richard, how would you recommend one deal with the internal biases that we all have?
I'll use another chess example to illustrate it, because I think it actually works in this context. A few years back, I had this idea, and I ran it by this, at the time, someone I was having lunch with, Magnus Carlsen, the top chess player probably in history. And what I said to him was that I'm now starting to think of strategy as a lazy man's tactics. And what that means in the chess context, tactics is the ability to calculate, right? To look move by move. Strategy tends to be what we think of as chess players are sort of the conceptual framework. It's the idea that certain, moves generally are good. And what I really was driving at, and by the way, he did actually think about it and agree. We as humans are not able to calculate particularly well, and as I said, if you play chess, you'll see that very quickly. But what we are very good at is coming up with a sort of rules, strategic concepts, which I'll refer to now in your terminology as biases. And these sort of get us by, in the chess context, we put rooks on open files, we put bishops where they have scope, because we cannot, as would computers, calculate out 50 moves and see whether in this particular instance that rule makes sense. So I guess I would say that biases and these sort of strategic concepts are sort of what keep us tethered to, to our reality and make us feel comfortable and help us to make decisions. But I think it's very healthy to recognize that that's all we're doing, and to keep, again, that sense of humility in our decision-making. Someone like you, Pete, has a much better sense of, how to game out the actuarial sort of routes and how to make investment decisions. Leland's got his great professional background in it, but still none of us can predict the future, right? And so we try to, basically place bets in different areas that take into account our own fallibility. So that's how I think about it. I think of biases as sort of our natural defense mechanism that makes us feel better about our inability to figure things out.
Well, I really agree with you. And in fact, I've always said a lot of these people talk about biases and errors, and really they're just features of our brain. But we're just about out of time, and I want to end by asking both of you to tell me a little bit more about the Agents for Critical Thinking, and what is this organization, and what are your goals, and where are you going with it?
Do you want me to go first on this one, Leland? Or do you want to
Yeah,
go?
why don't you go first on that one? Go ahead.
Yeah, basically, this just represents an effort that Leland and I have teamed up on to try to promote critical thinking in children. And what I would say to folks is there are many ways to do that. You can support scientific endeavors. I give all the money from my book, for example, to the Dawkins Foundation, what Richard Dawkins and his team does. There are chess organizations, scientific organizations. We've allocated some of our capital to educating children to be critical thinkers. And that's basically what it is. It's just a team effort that Leland and I have together. But really, our books are primarily the mechanisms of trying to convey our thinking in that regard. Leland, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I don't think I have very little to add to that, because I think that's, expresses it quite well. I mean, I think that we also would like to see an emphasis on numerical literacy more, because that spills into so many places, whether it's your personal life or your public policy decisions and how you vote, what you do about medical treatments. It's just everywhere, and it's just lacking so much in terms of people understanding that. So it's another area of critical thinking we'd like to get kids more involved in.
Great. Well, this has been fantastic, and I really want to thank both of you guys tremendously. And your book is A Capitalist Lament, and Richard's is the Earthbound Parent, and the organization is the Agents for Critical Thinking. And I really, really appreciate you guys spending the time, and it's been a wonderful pleasure to talk to you both.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you all. What a fascinating conversation, something that takes it to a new level, and what a lot of parents really want to hear. So Peter and I look forward to promoting this so that more people can know what you're up to. So thank you, Leland. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Peter Neuwirth. I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, producer of the show. Check out Money Mountaineering, and we will talk to you soon. Take good care and be smart about your critical thinking.